Hi, my name is Tyler and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Glad to see you. Glad you're here. So today I'm going to be discussing the torture and murder of Suzanne Capper. I want to also say sadism because that kind of plays a large role here. Before we get started, I do need to put a disclaimer out that this case is a little more brutal than what I've discussed in my previous video. So, listener and watch advisory. I'm sorry, I'm not good with these words. Okay, viewer discretion. Viewer discretion is advised. There's going to be a bit of discussion towards torture. There's going to be a bit of gruesome details here. I'm not going to go into full depth, but if you're going to watch this video, I'm just going to heavily advise you that this is going to be a little bloody. If you're easily triggered by details, even if in the smallest bit, if your imagination gets the best of you and you happen to go through a rabbit hole of picturing these circumstances on your own, then I advise that you tread lightly and with caution. Just letting you know, if you are a little sensitive towards descriptions of torture and such, be advised. This is just a little more murdery than the last video I did, so all right. Okay, let's continue. So Suzanne Jane Capper was born on 1976 in Manchester, England, to Elizabeth Capper. Suzanne had an older sister named Michelle Capper, and they both did not know their father. Their mother was Elizabeth Capper, and the only father figure in their life was their stepfather, John. In 1990, Suzanne's mother, Elizabeth, and her stepfather, John, both went through a separation that took a large toll on both Suzanne and Michelle. Suzanne, it was recorded that she spent some time with local authority. I believe during this time it seemed like she was being housed by different people, whether that be foster care or the police or somebody within the system. It was said that she spent some time with someone else other than her own family during this time, as it was very hard for her to get through the struggles of the most two prominent people in her life going through a separation and splitting up. After Elizabeth and John separated, Suzanne chose to live with her stepfather John for a short period of time. Suzanne Capper was going through a very rough time in her life as she was attending the last 2 years of high school at Mostyn Brook High School. It was said that her grades and her attendance were very erratic and insufficient, and it was a reflection of how this separation really affected her. Suzanne was known to be a very positive, friendly, and generous individual. Everybody that crossed paths with her had said that she was the kindest person they had ever met. There was nothing negative about her. She never treated people in a bad way. She was just all around good, and some would say that she was so nice she could easily be manipulated or influenced. Since Elizabeth and John separated, Suzanne had a very questionable taste in the people that she surrounded herself with. She started hanging out with a woman named Jean Powell, who she used to babysit for when she was about 10 years of age. She babysat for this woman for 6 years, and Jean Powell had 3 children whom Suzanne would look after. She heavily started becoming more involved with this woman after Elizabeth and John separated from one another. It was said that Suzanne would spend a lot of time at Jean Powell's house, and I assume it was maybe just to escape the tension within her household during the separation of her, her parents, or maybe she wasn't getting along with her stepfather, something of that sort that caused her to spend more time and attention at Jean Powell's than her own home or with her own family. I believe that even though Jean Powell had a bad influence as far as what she did for a career or to make ends meet, she was still this positive and wanted influence in the girls' lives. For example, Michelle Capper lived with Jean Powell for a short time until she left in August 1992. The reason she left Jean Powell's house and stopped renting a room there was because she was not fond of the, and I quote, evil new friends that were constantly coming around the house. Jean Powell constantly brought in these, like, just, I mean, you can assume if you're selling drugs and like illegal cars or stolen cars, you can assume that you're constantly kind of bringing in like these negative people, you know, with awful intentions. You know, not saying all of them were bad, but like obviously if you're coming in buying drugs or like stolen cars, like you're equally that, you know, there's something bad going on there. So Michelle decided to leave because their house was constantly having people coming in and out that were not trustworthy, and that made her uncomfortable. One of these evil new friends was Bernadette McNeely, okay? Some people called her Bernie, and I want to call her that too, but it kind of just sounds weird, so. Both Michelle and Suzanne Capper were friends of Jean Powell. You could consider Jean Powell like a family friend, and they knew of her lifestyle, her corrupt lifestyle, but they still remained associated with her. Jean Powell lived on 97 Langworthy Road, Mauston, in a small terraced Victorian home. This house was known locally in the community and in the neighborhood as a place you could go to buy local drugs or stolen cars. Jean Powell was a part of a very corrupt and illegal lifestyle, and it was what she did to bring in money for her children, to pay the bills. She would sell drugs, and she would sell illegal or stolen cars. So Bernie was a mother of 3, and she didn't live very far from Jean Powell's house, and she quite frequently visited Jean Powell's house, and they became friends. I don't know if it was because Jean Powell was her drug dealer or what. I could assume so, because later on it is said that everybody kind of involved within this situation except for Suzanne and her family was under the heavy influence of drugs, or they were drug addicts. So Bernadette McNeely frequented the house for quite some time until she eventually moved in with Jean Powell. For reasons unknown, I assume it's because she lost her house, could not keep it. She had 3 children to feed, and so they moved into Jean Powell's house and lived with one another. I kind of get the sense, like throughout this story, that people are leeching off of Jean Powell a lot, because later on when I'm introducing the other suspects, you'll kind of learn that people constantly came to her house and stayed there, including Suzanne Capper, which we'll get into a little bit here. But the house only had so many bedrooms, and friends who visited Jean Powell's home would say that the rooms were filled with children, because they had 6 children total, and that Bernie and Jean would share a mattress in the kitchen and would sleep there together because there was no space for them to stay within the house now that they had 6 kids living there. So again, not to assume anything, but I believe that Suzanne Capper was not getting along with one of her family members whom she lived with, and so she continuously visited Jean Powell's home up until she was going there so much it was kind of like she lived there. So she stayed there and resided there. I believe she did have a place to go back to, whether it be with her mother Elizabeth or her stepfather John, but it's documented that the reason she was involved with these individuals is because she preferred to stay there. And so she lived with Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely as well. Suzanne's sister, Michelle Capper, would say that as she was staying with Bernadette and Jean, she would witness her sister get bullied a lot by these 2 individuals. And she stated to the police when talking to them that Suzanne Capper would not endure their bullying. She would just, you know, or their insults or their behavior, because she was scared of them, but because she was just so nice and so kind that she wanted to pamper their every whim. And that's exactly what Michelle said. She wanted to pamper their every whim. She wanted to do whatever they asked of her. She was a very big people pleaser. All right, brace yourselves. There are a lot of people I'm about to introduce right now. So try to keep up with me, okay? So we have Jean Powell. I'm going to read my notes because this is a lot of relations here, so bear with me. Jean Powell was separated from her husband, who was Glenn Powell, who both had a friendly relationship, and he would visit the house regularly from a nearby house. Given that they have like 3 children together, it's quite, you know, obvious as to why they may retain a healthy friendship is for the children, I assume. And so there's Jean Powell and Glenn Powell, husband and wife. He visits the house to see the kids, right? So we have those 2 people, and we already know about Jean. And then we have Bernadette McNeely. Bernadette McNeely, we know about her, but she had a boyfriend at the time named Anthony Dudson. And here is like the disgusting part, okay? So Bernadette was 24 years of age at this time, and Anthony Dudson was 16. And they were boyfriend and girlfriend and having sexual relations with each other. Now, I don't know at this time if this was acceptable in the UK, but disgusting, okay? So, and then we have, so Anthony Dudson was having also sexual relations with Jean Powell. So there's this like whole triangle going on with like 2 MILFs and a young boy, and hopefully not at the same time, although it would be nice if not at all. Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to put that in your mental, but seriously. And I believe Anthony Dudson, the reason he was coming around this house and like seeing these individuals was because, I mean, Jean Powell was selling drugs and Bernadette McNeely was a drug, like taking drugs. Like I'm pretty sure it was like a mutual meeting. I'm not sure though. That's just my opinion, not fact. So Jean Powell was also involved with a client of hers sexually, yes, just confirming, named Jeffrey Lee. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. He frequently visited her house to purchase drugs such as amphetamines. So then we have that relation. So he's just a client who like frequently bought drugs, and she like fancied him, or maybe I don't want to get into that. But then we have Jean Powell's brother named Clifford Pook. He also frequently visited the house just because like that's his sister, and you know, they're very close knit, it seems. So as you can see, we've got a lot of relations going on, and let's go down the list, make sure we've memorized them, okay? So we've got Jean Powell, Glenn Powell, right? Anthony Dudson, Bernadette's boyfriend, and then we have Bernadette McNeely. And then we have Jeffrey Lee, who is the drug client, and then we have Clifford Pook. So we have 6 people involved here, all right? So remember those names and you should be fine. So leading up to the awful events that occurred to Suzanne Capper, we have a few situations here that were described by the suspects as to like what led to them hurting her. So I'm going to read these off, and yes, as I'm reading these off, keep in mind that they genuinely told authorities that this is the reason they hurt her. So the first situation would be that Jean Powell claims Suzanne had forced or manipulated a situation between Jean and a man, saying Suzanne had told this individual, this man, like, oh, you know, Jean will sleep with you for money. If you have sexual intercourse with her, you just pay her and she'll have sex with you anytime you want. And even though this wasn't proven, Jean Powell heavily claims that Suzanne Capper was trying to force her to have sex with somebody that she did not want to have sexual relations with. The second situation is when Bernadette McNeely believed that Suzanne had stolen a pink duffel coat from her that was cost her a good sum of money, like very expensive coat. Again, this was not proven. There was no evidence. It was basically just all word of mouth, but Bernadette claims this. She claims that Suzanne did not give her back the coat. In fact, it went missing or it was trashed by Suzanne. The third situation, in November 1992, Bernadette and Anthony Dudson claimed that Suzanne Capper had given them pubic lice. According to my sources, they were all sharing a single mattress within the house, and Suzanne had pubic lice, and they contracted it through the linens or the bed sheets, which is possible. or possibly sexual relations. Not entirely sure. So Bernadette and Anthony were claiming that Suzanne was the main source of the pubic lice, and they said that they were forced to shave their pubic area to evade the pubic lice that Suzanne had given them. Again, there was no proof of this, but they were heavily set on the fact that she had given them the pubic lice and that they had nothing to do with it. However, later on, Anthony would tell Jean Powell that he strongly believed Bernadette had contracted the pubic lice somehow and gave it to Anthony, who, you know, were sharing a bed together with Suzanne, and that is how Suzanne got the pubic lice, was through Bernadette to Anthony to Suzanne. So he confessed this to Jean, and yet Bernadette wanted to hold the narrative that it was from Suzanne, simply because these people are just awful, negative bullies, and there's a good chance she was embarrassed and needed to put the blame on somebody else. So these three events would later on be claimed by the suspects as to, like, why they wanted to hurt her. There is also something that I wanted to share before we get into the awful events that took place against Suzanne Capper. According to some sources, I'm not entirely sure how truthful this is, Jean Powell beat up Suzanne Capper physically, and it was so bad that Suzanne Capper left Jean Powell's home and ran to her mother's house, where she begged her mom to let her inside and help her, because the people at Jean's house were unhealthy. They were awful. I mean, they were beating her, they were insulting her, they were harassing her, and her mother actually turned her away. And her motive was trying to get Suzanne Capper to stop hanging out with these people so she would stop getting hurt. But instead of, I don't know, instead of maybe explaining that to her daughter or helping her out, she turned her daughter away and said, like, you can't come back here unless you stop hanging out with those people. Something like that, that basically had Suzanne go back to Jean's house in the middle of the night and have to face these people. You know, like, imagine getting beat up. You know, obviously you don't want to stay at that place. You don't want to be with the person that just assaulted you. And then you go to your family member for help, and they turn you away because, no, you either stop hanging out with those people or, you know, they give you like an ultimatum, and it ends up having you like have to be turned away and go back and face the person that just hurt you. You have to, like, swallow your pride, and because you have nowhere else to go, and you have to stay there. Like, I really hope that's not true, because her mom may have a lot of guilt right now. The next day, on December 7th, 1992, Suzanne Capper was lured to Jean Powell's house under the promise that a man she had fancied was waiting for her at the house. However, when she got there, it was not a man or a crush that she fancied waiting for her. Instead, it was Glenn Powell and Anthony Dudson who was waiting for her. When she stepped into the house, Glenn Powell held her down, shaved her head, her eyebrows, and then forced her to pick the hair up and place it in a trash bin. Glenn Powell then placed a plastic bag over Suzanne's head, sealed it, and as she was stumbling around the house, he hit her over the head with objects from around the house, and according to sources, with a wooden object. As Glenn did this, at one point Suzanne had tumbled to the floor, and as she laid curled up on the floor, both Bernadette and Jean were kicking her as she was on the ground, and they would occasionally use wooden utensils from the kitchen. They were 3-inch wooden spoons, and they would switch between that, their feet, their hands, and a belt. The beatings were so ferocious that Suzanne's left or right arm would remain useless on her side, hanging loose, indicating that at one point one of her assailants had broken her arms during the beating. Suzanne was then taken to the bathroom, where she was forced to shave her pubic hair in retaliation from Anthony and Bernadette for having them shave their pubic area because of the pubic lice, and then was forced to throw that hair away as well. After that, Jean Powell had locked her in a cupboard overnight. Later on, Jean Powell would claim that the reason she had locked Suzanne in a cupboard was to protect her from everyone else within the house. Now, this would have been proven true that Jean Powell was attempting to protect Suzanne if she was not taken out of that cupboard the next day, moved to another cupboard upstairs, and then eventually pulled from the cupboard and tortured more. On December 8th, Suzanne was taken from that cupboard and she was escorted to Bernadette McNeely's house from down the street. The reason that they relocated Suzanne Capper was because Suzanne Capper's crying in the middle of the night was beginning to frighten the 6 children that were within Jean's house, and they did not want to alarm the children. And so on December 8th, they relocated Suzanne to Bernadette's house, and when they got there, they tied her to a mattress in a spread eagle position, which is when you have your arms tied up kind of in a Y position above your head, and the same for your legs to both ends of the mattress with cable wire, so she could not break out of them. Suzanne was blindfolded and gagged and kept in a back room within Bernadette's house, and each day that she stayed there, the torture sessions became worse and worse and brutal. It was said that Bernadette McNeely recorded herself saying, "I'm Chucky, wanna play?" or actually using the phrase, "I'm Chucky, wanna play" from Child's Play movie, not sure which one, but a Chucky movie, and she had it repeat over and over and over again.
"Hi, I'm Chucky, wanna play?"
Put earphones on Suzanne and blast it to 160 volts along with EDM music in the mix. So they would have her listen to that over and over and over again for hours on end, till eventually it haunted her, and it was pressed into her brain so much that when Bernadette McNeely would commence torture sessions, she would say, "Chucky's coming to play." And in either case, Suzanne would scream at the mention of this phrase, knowing what was to come when Bernadette would say that. Suzanne was regularly beaten and injected with amphetamines, more specifically Adderall. And the reason that they did this was because they wanted Suzanne Capper to be focused and alert mentally 24/7 as they were torturing her, and they wanted her to stay awake until the next torture session, just so she wouldn't be able to mentally escape by falling asleep or drifting off somewhere that may help her endure the pain. Sometimes they would burn her skin with cigarettes, they would hit her, and they would do other physical torture. The main people who were abusing Suzanne at this time was Bernadette, Jean, and Glenn. Anthony as well. And sometime during the week, Jeffrey, Leigh, and Clifford Pook came to McNeely's house, and they were shown Capper, who at this point in time was laying in her own urine and feces. Since the smell, according to her attackers, was so rancid, they drew a bath of pure disinfectant. They placed Suzanne into that bath, and they took a yard brush, which has very rough plastic bristles, and they scrubbed her skin so hard that it began to fall off of her own flesh. Suzanne's skin began to peel off and slide into the bath, and flesh in various spots on her body were exposed. They then took her from this bath, placed her back on the mattress, bounded her, and a few moments later, Clifford Pook went to Suzanne, removed her blindfold, removed her gag, and demanded that she open her mouth. He then proceeded to grab a pair of metal pliers and said, I quote, "Right, I'm going to rip your teeth out." Cliff Pook took the pliers and he wrapped them around one of her teeth, and he struggled to yank it out. When it would not budge against his attempt to pull it out, he took the metal pliers and he began to hit Suzanne's teeth in order to weaken them enough to where he could yank out not only one but two teeth, leaving the nerves within Suzanne's mouth exposed, bleeding, and raw. The others in the room said that Cliff still was struggling slightly to pull them out, that when he yanked the pliers forward, he was pulling Suzanne's head with them. And when the tooth had finally came out from its root, her head yanked violently back and hit the mattress. As you can imagine, with everything that they have done to her so far, this went on for a good course of a week. And within that week, there was a possibility that she would have been rescued, and I'm about to get into that now. So while Suzanne was being tortured at McNeely's house, there was a man by the name of David Hall who came to visit. He was 18 years of age. I'm not entirely sure what his relation was to any of the individuals there. I can only assume that maybe he was also a client looking for drugs, a stolen car. I'm not entirely sure. However, this individual was called to sit in and watch the house apparently while I think it was Jeffrey Lee and Anthony Dudson stepped away to help Michelle Capper's husband with his car. While they stepped away, David Hall was asked to step in to watch the house, and I believe like the ladies were doing something, everybody else left, they were doing their own thing. And apparently they called him to house sit, and I'm not entirely sure why this guy wasn't like held accountable. I'm not saying I want him to pay because he didn't hurt Suzanne, but the thing is that while he was at the house, he went into the back room and they showed him Capper. They said like, hey, look, we have this girl in the back, like we've been torturing her, she's tied up, she's laying in her own feces. This man said that Suzanne Capper had asked him to help her, to remove her bindings, to get help, and he looked her straight in the face and he said, I'm sorry, I can't do that, I can't help you, because he was afraid that the others would hurt him and they would retaliate and do just the same to him. But the thing is that I'm sorry, but I'm calling bullshit on that. Nobody was in the house. He was 100% by himself with Suzanne. Nobody was there to hurt him. If he were to just unbound her and let her through the front door, nobody, could do anything if he just dialed the police, or if he ran across the street and got the police from neighbors and used their phone. If he didn't have a phone, there are so many possibilities to help her escape. And I'm pretty sure at that point, if he were to just unbound Suzanne, she would do the rest. You know what I mean? Like, this girl has been through pretty much hell at this point. If he were to have just removed the cables or the bindings from her and allowed her to be free from that mattress, she would have ran out the door and done the rest herself. It's sorry, but it wasn't very much effort and there wasn't very much threat on this guy, so I'm kind of calling bullshit here. The group was reported to have left and helped Michelle Capper's fiance Paul Barlow repair his vehicle, which is why David Hall was in the house sitting in and house sitting or what have you. So Paul Barlow recalls that moment in time when the two men had helped him with his vehicle and he was not aware what they were doing to Suzanne. And he said, and I want to read this quote, or not a quote, but he had said that if he were to have known what they were doing to Suzanne, he would have gone there himself, kicked down the door, got her out of there, and helped her escape. So I'm like, yes, preach. Take notes, David, take notes. Like, he would have rescued her if he had known, like, what they were doing to her. He would have gone there right away. He would have saved her. But, of course, these guys were acting like everything's fine, nothing's going on. So, of course, he didn't know until it was too late. After the group had helped Michelle Capper's fiance, they came into contact with Suzanne's stepfather, John, who talked to them, asked them if they had seen Michelle, if they knew where she was, where she could have possibly gone, knowing that Suzanne had hung out with that group quite frequently. He was hoping that they would have known about her whereabouts. The group, of course, said that they didn't know where she was. They had no idea where she could be. They didn't seen her. And from there, Suzanne's stepfather John had told them, okay, well, I think I'm going to call the police and report her as a missing person because I have not seen her for a week, almost a week. I have not heard from her for almost a week, and I am quite worried. I'm scared for her. I don't know where she is. So after finding out that information, they went back to the house, and of course, it changed their entire plans. After hearing that Suzanne's stepfather John was going to report her as a missing person to the police, they all rushed back to Bernadette's house. In the early morning of December 14th, 1992, Suzanne was taken from McNeely's house and shoved into the trunk of a Fiat Panda, a vehicle stolen by the group. They then drove 15 miles from McNeely's house all the way to a narrow lane at Werneth Low near Romilly on the outskirts of Stockport. When they arrived at the embankment, it was said that they dragged Suzanne out of the car and they pushed her down this very steep hill where she tumbled through brambles and cut skin open, splinters, until she reached the bottom. Bernadette then poured petrol all over Suzanne and attempted to light her on fire using a taper of sorts, trying to light something on fire and then touch Suzanne with it. When that wasn't working, they tried to use a rolled up piece of paper. When that didn't work, Glenn Powell just took the lighter, walked up to Suzanne, and placed the lighter to her back and lit her on fire. As Suzanne erupted into flames, the group watched in amusement, and it was even said that as they began to walk away, watched Suzanne light up in flames and light the forest around her. They sang "Burn, Baby, Burn." Believing that Suzanne was dead, they left in that Fiat Panda and they drove away. It was said that they stopped by the store to grab a few canned drinks and then headed back to the house. When they returned, Pook and Cliff were waiting for them and they asked if it was done, and Glenn Powell, laughing and smiling, had said yes, it's done, and handed his lighter back to Pook. Little did they know that even after a week full of torture and being set on fire, Suzanne had survived. She climbed the embankment and scrambled to the main road, where she hobbled half a mile to Comstall Road. Barry Sutcliffe was a driver on that road who at 6:10 in the morning came across Suzanne Capper. He was on his way to work with two of his other colleagues in the vehicle, and he stopped to help her as he had seen that she was visibly wounded and had burns all over her body. When Barry found Suzanne, she said to him in a panic, and I quote, "Over there in the field, they burnt me, they put petrol on me." Barry and his colleagues immediately took Suzanne to a nearby house and frantically alerted the residents, Michael and Margaret Coop. Michael and Margaret Coop, seeing how visibly injured Suzanne was, had called an ambulance for her. While they waited for the authorities and for help to arrive, they remembered detail for detail exactly how Suzanne had appeared to them, and here are the statements that they gave the media. Michael Coop described his memory of Suzanne as both her hands appeared like ash, her legs were just like raw meat, and her feet appeared to be badly charred. I was struck by how polite the victim was. She was constantly thanking my wife for her assistance. Margaret Coop had said, I instinctively went to put my arms around her, but she pulled away because she could not bear to be touched. Her head was shaved, and there were recent, not new cuts to her head. Her face was featureless, her hands were red, raw, and black at the fingertips. Her legs were red from top to bottom. She couldn't bear anything near her legs. She looked like the victim of an attack in the Vietnam War, but I felt she would survive. I had this theory that now she had got to somewhere she could be helped, she would live. Everyone that had seen Suzanne and helped her would confirm exactly how bad her injuries were and the physical state of her body. It was said that Suzanne managed to chug down 6 glasses of water while waiting for the ambulance, but could barely hold the glass, given that her fingers and her hands were so burnt that flesh, tissue, and nerves were exposed and hanging off from her body. When an ambulance and authorities had arrived, they rushed Suzanne to the hospital, where she was immediately attended to. Within those very first few hours of being at the hospital, she was able to list her 6 attackers and give off the address for Jean and Bernadette McNeely's house. Detective Inspector Peter Wall of Great Manchester Police had led the case, and he ordered all of his policemen to go to McNeely's address and arrest everybody that was found there. All 6 suspects and attackers were found at the house, and they were arrested and brought in for questioning. Meanwhile, while Suzanne was in the hospital being tended to, doctors and authorities asked who they could contact for her to come see her at the hospital and be there for her. She listed her mother Elizabeth and her stepfather John, who arrived shortly after being contacted. And when they got there, sad to say, they did not recognize Suzanne, their own daughter, for her features had been deteriorated that bad. The police had to take a partial fingerprint from one of her thumbs that was still reserved, even though she had been burned pretty bad. They took this fingerprint from like the smallest segment of her thumb, and they placed it on a piece of paper, and they were able to identify that it was indeed Suzanne Capper who laid in this hospital bed. It was reported that while Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely were being arrested and, having handcuffs placed on their wrists, that they were joking, smiling, and laughing with everybody else, and that all 6 of the attackers were saying that they had nothing to do with it and they did not know what police were talking about. When they were being questioned, nobody was taking any accountability or telling police what had happened. In fact, they were blaming other people for what had happened to Suzanne, on everybody else. They were doing their best to deflect the blame or any responsibility, up until the point that Anthony Dudson's father had urged him to tell the truth about what had happened to police, whether it was to help him gain a better sentence or just to help the investigation and the Capper family from having to, wait this out any longer than it needed to be. Anthony Dudson eventually took his father's advice, and he began to tell detectives exactly what they needed to know. As he was unfolding the story to detectives, police recall being very blown away exactly how one human being could do this to another human being. In fact, police were so baffled and so horrified at how these 6 individuals tortured and almost murdered Suzanne at this point that they had collected money from each individual within the police department to send flowers to Suzanne while she was staying in the hospital. Jeffrey, Glenn, Anthony, Bernadette, Cliff, and Jean were put initially in prison for the kidnapping and attempted murder of Suzanne Capper. Exactly 4 days after being set on fire, on December 18th, Suzanne would fall into a coma and never regain consciousness, therefore dying in her sleep. Following after Suzanne Capper's death, on December 23rd, Jeffrey, Glenn, Anthony, Bernadette, Cliff, and Jean were then each sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Suzanne Capper. About a year later, an inquest was opened on January 18th, 1993 by a man named Leonard Gorodkin. They interviewed the man who did the original autopsy on Suzanne Capper, or who did the original and first autopsy on Suzanne Capper, and it was said that given his research, Suzanne Capper had suffered 75 to 80% damage internally on her body from the fire and the patrol, that it was from the start recognized she had a minimal chance of surviving these wounds, and eternally it had damaged her and forced her into a coma where she later on died. And that was her cause of death. So excuse me if I'm kind of looking down on my paper too much. This is like some details that, like a lot of information I couldn't obtain up here. So unfortunately, that's what happened to Suzanne Capper, and that's the story of her, week of torture and sadism, and then eventually dying 4 days later due to being set on fire. The murderers and where they are now, I have that information if you're interested. The murderers and their sentences. Anthony, Glenn, Jean, Bernadette, Cliff, and Jeffrey were given life sentences, which little by little in some of their cases were appealed and lessened. So for example, Anthony Dudson and Jeffrey Lay both made appeals. So Jeffrey Lay had his prison sentence reduced from 12 years to prison, 12 years in prison to 9 years in prison, 2 years after Suzanne had passed on November 4th, 1994. Anthony Dudson was 16 years old at the time and had his prison sentence reduced in the year 2002 from 18 years to 16 years in prison. Since he was 16 years old, the minimum of years to serve in prison was 16 years before he could be placed on parole. Even though this is like a law, I guess, in the UK, or they clearly explained this, Anthony Dudson was still not, happy with his reduction, and he attempted to make another appeal, but on November 21st, 2003, the court thankfully denied his attempt at a second reduction. And the reason I say thankfully is because, like, I don't think any of these people deserve to be out of prison right now, like, or get any reductions. They deserve life in prison, and they should just suck it the fuck up. I'm sorry, you tortured a girl for a week and then set her on fire, and she later on died, and you want to get a reduction on your prison sentence so you can get out and go back into society? Maybe you should have thought about that before, I don't know, maybe hurting somebody and doing unspeakable things to them. Like, bye. In fact, Anthony did not get that, second appeal or second reduction, but, it almost seems like they made up for it by taking him and putting him in an open prison in, I believe, in the same year, actually, I think. So an open prison, if you don't know what an open prison is, I will tell you. It's a type of prison where an inmate or the convicted are trusted to serve their sentences with minimal supervision and perimeter security. They are often not locked in their cells, they are free to roam the grounds, and they can actually take up employment when they are serving their time. So it's a lot of free range, it's a lot of do what you want, and it sounds like a prison you would be put in actually for like petty crimes, something where you didn't harm an individual, you maybe just stole something, but like, maybe damaged some property, but not where you like murdered or harmed somebody. Instead, like, instead of, like for petty crimes, but instead he was put in there and he actually killed somebody, so I don't understand. And let me just put it out there, I don't understand the UK's legal system. Obviously, I'm not from there. I maybe should have done a little bit more research into it. If you guys know anything or if you want to share anything, please put them in the comments. Like, I'll correct myself where it's needed. But just so far, like, given the fact that Suzanne Capper was bound to a bed, gagged, blindfolded, and then tortured for a full-on week, and then Anthony gets to roam a prison and do as he pleases, basically, is like, make it make sense. And then it only gets worse from there. Okay, so Bernadette McNeely, do we remember her? Yes, they are officially calling her the Chucky killer because she recorded herself saying, "I'm Chucky, wanna play?" and playing it over and over and over again to torture Suzanne that way. She was released back into the world in the year 2014. Yes, you heard that right. So the judge was told by representatives of the prison that she had become a model prisoner, meaning she was leading by a positive example in her time that she served in prison. She became a gym orderly at the prison and would listen to other inmates who wanted to talk about the reason they were put in prison. Their crimes and their stories would teach Bernadette just how what she had done to Suzanne was awful. So there was all this mention and talk about how heavily Bernadette had become with remorse and contrition for what she had done. Bernadette had also assisted prison guards in the capturing of another inmate who had attempted to escape the prison. As a reward, she was recognized for her assistance and had some time taken off from her prison sentence. There is also a lot of mention, and it has been confirmed, that Bernadette McNeely was also partaking in a lot of romantic or intimate relationships with a lot of male and female individuals at the prison. Like everything from prison guards to staff to inmates and even the prison governor, which I'm pretty sure is like the warden, Mike Martin. And Mike Martin resigned from his position before, as prison governor, before any disciplinary action could be taken against him specifically. So some would say that Bernadette was purposely initiating sexual relations with people within the prison to manipulate them and just climb her way to the top and get out of the prison eventually, which seems kind of like what happened, and that it helped her out a lot. It was even said that while she was in prison, Bernadette had a romantic relationship with 2 serial killers in the prison. One of them being Myra Hindley, who was a serial killer convicted for the rapes and murders of 5 small children. and then another serial killer by the name of Rosemary Rose West, who was convicted in 1995 for 10 murders, one being the murder of her 8-year-old stepsister, Charmaine. There was no doubt that something more than a friendship was going on with these 3 individuals, because it was confirmed that Rose and Myra had a thing, and that Myra and Bernadette had a thing going on. So it was like this whole triangle thing. So as you can imagine, when Bernadette was released in December of 2014, her release came as a shock to a lot of inmates that she served time with in prison. One reported that Bernadette had said, when referring to the crimes she committed against Suzanne, that Bernadette had said it was someone else's fault and that she had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, and she was not sorry for what she did. A lot of fellow inmates of Bernadette described her as manipulative, malicious, and evil. Bernadette now lives under a different identity. I'm not really sure what the new identity is. I think it's Bernie Gardiner, not entirely sure. And she lives in a secret location in northwest England now. If you guys look her up and you read some of the articles, it's pretty obvious that her community and her neighborhood do not want her at all. The UK does not want her at all. They're not very stoked or happy or pleased that she's out of jail and roaming the world again, back into society. Let's recap. So that's where everyone is right now. So we've got Jeffrey Lay and Clifford Pook, who managed to be released early on life licenses. Not really sure what that means, but they're back into society. Bernadette McNeely basically manipulated her way out of prison by sleeping with everybody, and she's back in society. And Glenn Powell, Jean Powell, and Anthony Dudson are still serving their time in prison. And then last but not least, I thought I would, close this story off with saying that Suzanne's mother, Elizabeth Dunbar, opened up to the media in 2013, I believe, and shared with, the public about how she was constantly writing letters to the parole boards about how they shouldn't be letting these people out of prison, and reminding them what they did to her daughter, what they're capable of, and that they should continue to serve their life in prison. After years of doing this, Elizabeth has unfortunately chosen to give up on attempting to do this because she feels that her voice is not heard or considered by the parole board bosses, as they let people like Anthony Dunbar and Bernadette McNeely and such out of jail, even though they committed such a horrendous crime against Suzanne Capper. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me on this story. I hope you enjoyed it. It's kind of just like a wanting to spread awareness on what happened to Suzanne Capper, and it's awful. I can't even wrap my mind around, how somebody could do this, but, here we are. And I apologize for, any background noises you may have picked up, out of my control, but thank you for sticking around and listening and joining me today. If you haven't already, please give this video a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, because I can't speak proper English and I got more content like this coming your way. So thank you very much for being here, hanging out with me today. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one.